Hello, fellow crafters. This is Yana Smakula for SimonsStamp.com. Welcome back for another Yippee for Yana video. Today, similar to my previous video, I was inspired by all of your feedback and comments. So today I'm creating more regular size A2 cards using Slimline products. Maybe for my next video, I'll try this the other way around, using regular products for Slimline cards. What do you say? Anyhow, today I have 3 cards to share, all A2 projects, so they all measure 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, created using 3 main products from Simons Stamp. Slimline Greetings stamp set, I have lots more ideas with this stamp set. Large Falling Snow stencil for Slimline cards, both of these are newer products, and an oldie but goodie winter scene stamp and die set. Let's dive right in. I've already positioned the Merry Christmas sentiment from the Slimline Greetings stamp set on the lid of my mini MISTI stamping tool. I'm using both the mini and the regular size MISTIs today, and I encourage you to use this or similar tool as well. It makes a world of a difference when stamping. I have a panel of light blue cardstock. This is in color Arctic by Hero Arts, but I will change it up to a slightly darker blue, Mist, also by Hero Arts. I plan to heat emboss this sentiment in white embossing powder on the light blue panel, and then add falling snow using a stencil and create a darling scene around the sentiment using the winter scene stamp set. I've treated the paper with anti-static powder. Next, I used a wide fan brush to spread that powder on the paper. I've misplaced my usual small wide brush, so I had to use this fan brush from Tonic Studios. Then I inked up the stamp using clear embossing ink and stamped it onto the panel. Next, I used white detail embossing powder from Simons Stamp, and now I'm using my heat tool and melting the powder in place. The reason I later used a slightly darker blue instead of this blue is because this particular panel seemed too light. The white embossing wasn't too prominently visible on the panel. It was getting lost, especially after I had added the snow. So I needed to use a darker background. I could have ink blended it, but I didn't really want to mess with it. So I just used a darker color cardstock instead. Next, I used the Slimline Falling Snow stencil. I taped my panel from the back of the stencil. This ensured that my panel wasn't going to move and would stay in place. And then I used a palette knife and texture paste and applied the paste through the stencil to add dimensional snow to my background. So my first card features a combination of both Slimline Sentiment Set and Slimline Stencil. And the second card will just use the Slimline Sentiments, and the last one will use just the Slimline Stencil. I've had this jar with the texture paste for quite some time, and I can see that it's starting to get too thick. It was quite hard to spread it on the stencil. Having added the paste, I removed the stencil, or rather, I removed the paper from the back of the stencil. I left the paper to dry on my desk while I took the stencil and palette knife to the sink and washed them both. You want to make sure to do that, as once the paste dries on your tools, you won't be able to get it off or use your tools again, so make sure to wash them. I've already done some additional stamping, coloring, and die cutting ahead of time. I created darling scene images from the winter scene stamp set, and you can see them on my desk now. I plan to use the string of lights to add them under the word Merry to dress up the sentiment. That was my main idea for these cards. Next, I plan to add little images on the left and right of the sentiment, creating a little scene. I thought that looked so perfectly cute. Before adhering anything down, I used my white pen. This is Sakura in size 10, and I added white highlights to the images, particularly to the lights, but also to the trees, deer, and mountains. The white highlights on the trees meant to look like snow on the branches, and I think that worked perfectly. I also used an aqua shimmer pen from Tonic Studios and colored each letter in. Now this added pretty subtle shimmer to my card. It's hard to see on camera or in the photos, but it looks really pretty in real life. I used foam adhesive squares and also glue to add elements onto the panel to create my scene, and I really like the way this turned out. I also heat embossed Wishing You sentiment in white detail embossing powder on red cardstock, and I trimmed that to a banner shape and found mounted above the Mary, finishing up my sentiment. The Wishing You comes from the stained glass greetings from Simon Says stamp. It's an older stamp set, but one that I truly love and use often. I trimmed this panel to 3 3/4 by 5 inches and foam mounted onto A2 white top folding card base. And this gave me a pretty white border around my panel, and I love the result. Moving on, for my second card, I wanted to use the Slimline sentiment stamp set to make a custom background. The Merry Christmas sentiment is large enough to easily and quickly cover the front of an A2 card. I've positioned the stamps on the lid of my regular size MISTI in the center, and I plan to move the background panel while keeping the stamp in the same place to create that background. I'm starting with the same mist cardstock by Hero Arts. It's that slightly darker light blue. Again, I've treated my panel with anti-static powder. I inked up the stamp with clear embossing ink and stamped onto the panel. I'm going to add detail white embossing powder after each impression I make, but I'm not going to heat set it just yet, as I don't want my paper to warp. The more you hit your paper with a heat tool, the more heat you apply, the more it will warp. So it's best to heat set the paper as few times as possible. I'll still heat set it quite a few times, but at least not after every impression I make. I move my panel around in the MISTI, trying to find the optimal position to stamp the sentiment. I'm not going for some precise placement. I just want parts of the sentiment on the panel so that it would be clear to the recipient that the final message reads Merry Christmas. Having stamped it 3 times, I decided that I need to heat set what I have so that I don't accidentally smear the powder all over the place. So I went ahead and heat set this part of the background. Having done that, I added the top partial row and again covered that with white embossing powder and heat set it. To stamp the bottom part of the panel, I repositioned the stamp. I just figured that would make it easier. And basically, I repeated the same steps when building this background. I treated the paper with anti-static powder. I inked images with clear embossing ink. I added white detail embossing powder and I heat set it when I felt necessary. Now, I did not measure anything for spacing, and certainly spacing wasn't perfect between the rows of my background. I eyeballed the placement, and I think it was good enough for me. Stamping a background like this certainly is time-consuming. It is, of course, much easier to stamp a background using a background stamp, but this method allows us to stretch our supplies and use them in a variety of additional ways, giving them more bang for the buck, so to speak. Next, I again stamped, colored, and cut out the images to make a scene for this card. I also stamped a rectangle with the hills, and here I'm using my Copic markers in B00 and B000 to add some basic coloring, or rather basic shading. The stamping was done in Memento Tuxedo Black ink on Neenah Solar White 80-pound cardstock. I did use a coordinating die to cut the rectangle out, but I wasn't planning on using the entire rectangle. In fact, I just wanted to use the bottom part of the hills, so I used my scissors and cut the bottom part off. I love using these Spring Assist scissors from Tonic Studios for fussy cutting. They are the best I've ever had. Next, I white heat embossed a sub-sentiment that reads, Peace to you this season. And this comes from the Clean Line Christmas stamp set. And I did my embossing in same detail white embossing powder on red cardstock and cut that to a banner shape using a Spellbinder's banner die. I have the Clean Line Christmas stamp set on my desk because I really like it and I hope to use it to make another card. So maybe I'll share that on my blog soon. Next, I had some imperfections in my heat embossing, so I fixed that using a white pen. I used Sakura size 0.5 pen for this, the smallest one, and it worked like a charm. The hills die cut that I had also needed some fixing. You can see those little lines that extend past the hills. Those are the lines that make the rectangle. They look odd in this instance. So to cover them up, I used a white pen. Here I'm using a size 10 pen, and I just colored that area white, and you can't ever tell that I had anything stamped there in black. I like how the white pen covers any imperfections up. I used foam adhesive squares and foam mounted my images onto the background, building my scene. Now, I love to make cards where I have several small scene building elements, as this allows me to arrange them how I like and make my little scene my own. I finished this card by adding clear droplets around the focal point. I didn't trim this background, but rather adhere the entire piece onto an A2 white side folding card base. And this finished my card number 2. For my card number 3, like I mentioned, I used just the stencil to create falling snow. I love this stencil and the fact that it can be used for both Slimline and A2 cards. I repeated the same steps in terms of building this card, so I'm not going to bore you with the process again. Instead, I'll just show you the finished project. So that's it from me for today. I hope you found this video useful. If you make a card inspired by this video, we'd love it if you shared your project online and tagged us on social media. We always enjoy seeing what you make. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up and to subscribe to this channel if you haven't yet done so. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you next time.